talk about the structure of Enneagram Type 6. I'm a 6-wing 7, 9-wing 1, 4-wing 3, sexual, social, and to start with a little disclaimer, because 6s love disclaimers, I'm going to be sharing a lot of personal examples and observations about how I see Type 6 existing in the wild, but these will categorically not apply to all 6s. 6 is a really varied type. It's also an annoyingly contrarian type, so if you say anything in Type 6 description that a particular 6 doesn't resonate with, they have to point it out and let you know. Obviously my experience being a Type 6 has been sort of coloured by having double withdrawn fixes, by my stacking, although I'm not going to go into instincts very much, by being pretty frustration heavy, so if you wanted to hear about all the ways in which it is shit to be a Type 6, this is probably the right video. And also by being wing 7 over wing 5. I'm not sure if you would get a wing 5 making a video like this. They tend to be a bit more insular and private, so yeah. So to briefly sum up the structural components of Type 6, it is a head type, it is an attachment type, it's a superego type, and it is a reactive type, and I'm going to talk about each of those in turn. Like 5 and 7, 6s are head types, which means their core wound and their personality structure all ultimately stem from fear. The way head types deal with fear is through their mental orientation and understanding of the world, which for 6s means looking to outside sources to try to form a consistent, reliable mental structure that will help you to understand and navigate the terrifying, complex, confusing world that you've been forced to exist in. But basically, because Type 6s have no actual trust in themselves to be able to handle the unknown and unexpected, they can never feel fully stable and secure in whatever mental structure they form, so they constantly have to reassess it to try to find the ways that the unexpected and unknown could sneak in and mess everything up, basically. And this is ultimately where the torture of Type 6 lies. For me, I sort of think of the Type 6 head as if you imagine being on a platform that was balanced in the middle on a single central spire, that platform would never quite stay still. It would always be you'd always feel like it was going to tip over, and if you didn't have something to hold on to, you could fall off the side into the abyss below. So the thing you are clinging to is so crucial, you have to be minutely aware of anything that could go wrong with it. If you imagine it as a rope, you have to be constantly watching to see is the rope fraying, because maybe you need to find something else to cling on to. It's kind of the idea that if it's not perfectly sound and perfectly secure, it might not be safe at all. It might not be safe to depend on. So head types are all tracking data, but where 7s and 5s, their head center need is more in what they do with the data in the discovery process. 5s want to narrow it down and refine it. 7s want to continually discard and seek new data when it doesn't match their idealism. 6s have a sort of existential terror in uncertainty, so the discovery process can be a place of horror until they figure out how to either fit that data into their existing framework or settle into a new framework of understanding. Which isn't to say that 6s can't be imaginative or want to learn new things. In fact, 6s have this kind of annoying need to know everything about something that they care about. But 6s do, on some level, want the world to be black and white and neat and tidy without annoying exceptions or grey areas, because they need it to be easy to understand and trust in. 6s often love categorizing systems for this reason, things like MBTI, things like the Enneagram, astrology, or some 6s are really into social labels like punk and goth and things like that, or some 6s are really fixated on political affiliations. But it's all a way of understanding the world and where you fit into it in a systemic, organised way. So the reason why I say 6s don't like grey areas and loose ends and things is that 6s are frustratingly detail-oriented as long as the detail isn't lining up in some way. They are acutely aware when things don't make perfect sense, and they will absolutely laser focus on any exception and fear, basically, that that discredits the entire system or theory or whatever that they are depending on. This is really obvious when sixes are in a typing crisis, because they will immediately call attention to any part of a type 6 description or whatever that they feel doesn't fit them, and use that to say, well, doesn't this mean that I'm not a type 6? I know a couple of months after I was typed, I was, sat on being a type 6, but there were other parts of my typing I wasn't sure of, and I had a follow-up call with Sophie where I was like, yeah, but what about this? What about this? Are you sure? For like 3 hours. So yeah, if it doesn't line up, a 6 must question and understand why, because they need that like contextualizing information to make the exception or the grey area make sense again. Now, the reason 6s can be so fucking annoying in this way is that it is a way of vetting an authority or a source. It's a way of proving to yourself that it is something that you can feel secure in and depend on. However, 6s can actually also be doing this because they want to be able to completely discard a source when they don't like what it's saying. Because 6s lack that like internal trust in their head center, they often don't feel secure just discarding something like out of the blue based on their own understanding of the world. They have to vet it as thoroughly as a source they like, which gets really fucking exhausting. Sometimes you just want some kind of proof from the outside, but you actually don't have to listen to this source at all. Something that I observed in myself during my am I a 4 or am I a 6 typing crisis was that I saw myself wanting to discard any description of a type 6 that resonated with me, or any description of a type 4 that didn't resonate with me. So I would try and find reasons why I didn't have to listen to those. And I finally noticed I was making it so black and white. It was like, this source is good and nice because it makes me feel happy, it makes me feel like a 4, but this source is bad and mean and gatekeeping, and it doesn't really understand the Enneagram. Yeah, funny thing about that, those were the sources that did understand the Enneagram. I just didn't want to listen to them. I wasn't ready to incorporate them into my mental framework and kind of have to reset my entire worldview in that way. And this is why stereotypes of type 6s as being these like sad little sheep that just follow everything they're told to do are so frustrating, because 6s do have this need to vet everything for themselves. Like, yes, they are the type that's most likely to be like slavishly devoted to an authority, but they're also just as likely to question it and rebel against it. Like, 6s are actually naturally really averse to blindly trusting in the word of somebody else if it doesn't line up with their understanding of the world. I once worked with a type 6 yes bro boss who questioned literally everything I did or that I wanted to do, and it wasn't because they didn't like my work or think I was good or like anything like that. It was because if they had like full knowledge and understanding of something, they could check it all and feel absolutely secure in it themselves. But because my role was in something that they didn't like really understand, they couldn't have that internal security of having the total understanding of like what I was wanting to do. They couldn't vet every little thing and feel totally secure in it, and they had to put their trust in something that like they didn't fully understand, and that creates a level of uncertainty that is really deeply uncomfortable for type 6. There's a feeling for 6s that if you just knew the absolute black and white truth of a situation, that you could finally relax and trust in the flow of the universe. But there is no objective truth, and so a type 6's actual growth lies in learning to accept uncertainty and to trust in yourself that you can handle it regardless of what gets thrown at you. But the thing is, the core personality is not inclined to grow. It's the natural inclination is to keep reinforcing your type structures and patterns, to keep protecting and dealing with the core wound and the core fear. And for 6s, that self-torturing inclination is to just keep seeking the truth. Like, to keep feeling like you've finally found this one explanation that, makes sense of everything, only to then find flaws in it. And then to discard it again. It's, yeah, a little bit torturous at times. Along with 3s and 9s, 6 is an attachment type, which can also be known as an adaptation type, a primary type, or a triangle type. 6s are often really picky about words, and I have to admit I had a really strong reaction to the idea of being an attachment type, because that word, along with the descriptions, like they're not very good descriptions, brought up this image of being like a little limpet, like just clinging to things with no personality of my own. But basically, attachment types on a completely core and subconscious level feel the need to adapt themselves to the outside world in order to keep getting their needs met. They need to attach or stay attached or reattach to whatever is meeting their core needs. This doesn't always mean doing what other people want from you. Like, if you recognize what somebody wants of you and then you intentionally do the opposite or do something else, you're actually just adapting yourself in another way. For 6s, the core need that is met through attaching to things outside themselves is their need for orientation and guidance, their understanding of the world, basically. Attachment types are separated from their core centre, so even though 6s are head types and they always seem to have, 10 million thoughts running around in their gremlin brains, their own understanding of the world and their own thoughts don't feel secure or stable, so they can't really be trusted. They need to seek constant help from outside sources and authorities to try to gain some kind of security and stability and grounding in their heads. But this can only last a brief time until something comes along to make you doubt it again, and then you have to question the source again. But kind of paradoxically, this makes 6s feel more secure in the source when they get to reattach to it. It's kind of like, oh good, another hole has been fixed, I'm safe here again, I'll feel safe here forever. And then you notice another hole, and the whole cycle starts again until the 6 finds a new source which meets their needs better. If you're at all familiar with how people with OCD seek reassurance, I feel like it's kind of to me is what this type 6 brain is doing in general anyway, and I've kind of joked before that OCD feels like type 6 on steroids in some ways. Reassurance seeking in OCD means like you get a terrifying intrusive thought and then you need to go and ask other people or go and search on Google for 5 hours to try to find out that it isn't true, like to get people to tell you that you're not a bad person or whatever. And when you get this reassurance, you instantly feel soothed and the anxiety goes. But then you think of something else. You think of another thought, you get another intrusive thought, or you find a problem with the reassurance that you got, and this time the anxiety is even worse. 6 is seeking an ultimate truth to reassure them, but by doing that, by getting that reassurance, all you're actually doing is reinforcing that you can't handle not having that reassurance. You can't handle uncertainty and anxiety. And the only way to ever actually deal with it properly is to just let the anxiety exist. I want to circle back to the word authority because I think it can be a kind of triggering word to people who don't want to admit they're 6s. When people say that 6s are seeking authority, that doesn't necessarily mean like a social authority figure, like a teacher or whatever, but it's about the type 6 need to believe in the word of an outside source rather than in their own internal authority. Some examples of type 6 outsourcing authority could be like, 6s can have a really strong sense or gut instinct or gut understanding of what they want to do in a situation, or like even just their understanding of a situation, but they need to run it past somebody else before they can trust in their own intuition. And half the time, it doesn't matter how secure you are or how certain you are of your own understanding, the moment somebody gives you other advice or has a different understanding of the situation, it can be really hard to not immediately think you must be wrong and need to like adapt to what they see in that situation. Or 6s can often like immediately lose their certainty the moment somebody questions them or like states their own opinion too firmly. Like, this is a really stupid example and I felt so stupid when it happened, but somebody once corrected me on the pronunciation of my own surname and it took me a solid 30 seconds to be like, hang on, no, I do know how to pronounce my own name. Yeah, 6s find it really hard to trust in their own like intelligence and understanding at times. 6s do have a fear of like judgment and criticism and losing support, so there is a feeling that you need to be like beyond criticism in some ways. It doesn't necessarily mean perfectionism, like it probably could do, like I would imagine like 613s, for example, having a much stronger perfectionism streak, but 6s can also become really wishy-washy if anyone is like depending on their opinion. And this is where the 6 disclaimers come in, where they'll like, you know, make sure that you know that they're not that sure really, and like it's something they read a long time ago, and don't quote me on it, for example, is a really 6 phrase, like don't hold me to it or don't quote me on it. I use those both quite a lot. Another thing 6s will do to try to like protect themselves in this way is they will tell you the bad parts of themselves or mistakes they've made or ways they think that they might have let you down, like way before you actually have the chance to notice it yourself. I think for a type 6 it feels better to be able to point these things out yourself and kind of control the narrative in a way, like you get to self-efface and make jokes about it, and this allows you to kind of minimize the damage and still present yourself as likable and nice. And 6s will make themselves seem weak and cute to try to stop you from being mean to them. A really silly example of this is I recently went to a restaurant with some friends and I was like, oh yeah, I'm getting the pate is fucking phenomenal here. And 2 of my friends said, oh, that sounds really good, we're gonna get that too. And it was like an alarm going off inside me. Like, I was like, oh my god, what if the pate comes out and it's shit? What if they've changed chefs? Like, you know, what if it's not as good as I've made it sound like? And I immediately had to start making excuses for myself in case that happened. And it's so dumb, because who gives a fuck if the pate is not very good? Like, if a friend recommended me some food and I didn't like it, I would just think that was kind of funny. But 6s are like really... 6s can be really nervous of like somebody taking them at their word and then being disappointed in them or mad at them. So 6s are often referred to in descriptions as preparing for the worst. And I think sometimes people can like misread this and think it means that like 6s are preparing for the worst in very like SP ways. So like they're obsessed with like home security or fire safety or like building fallout shelters for the apocalypse kind of thing. But preparing for the worst applies to like every aspect of life for 6s and in much smaller ways. 6s can be very conscious of anything that could get them into trouble. And I've been using like really like childish phrasing related to this stuff because it really does feel like a holdover from childhood that you never quite grow out of as a 6, that it's this constant feeling that you might have to explain your actions to some big bad parental authority figure. Like, I see some of the 6s I know preparing like verbal arguments to defend themselves if they've done something that they think somebody could question them on, and it can be about like absolutely minuscule things, and I'm just sat there like, oh my god, nobody would ever question you on this. But that's the funny thing, 6s can really see when other 6s are being ridiculous, but they can see when they themselves are being ridiculous, but they can't do anything about it, because when you're actually in that kind of 6y crisis where you're trying to prepare for the worst, it's really terrifying, and somebody telling you like, oh, you're being stupid would not help at all. 6s are very quick to blame other people, not necessarily in the sense that, you know, a 6 will do something and they'll say, oh no, that person did it, not me. But 6s will often like look at other people who are doing the same wrong thing that the 6 did and use that as proof that what they did was okay or that they shouldn't get into trouble for it. 6s are called the tribal type, and although I don't love the connotations of that, even social last 6s are pretty people oriented, and kind of the reason for that is that other people are a massive support system and, you know, a place to find guidance, whether that's like actual individual people in the 6's life or whether it's like social systems like a religion or a cult like the Enneagram. I think how a 6 uses other people as a support system, although uses is a bit of a negative word, but uses other people as a support system is probably dependent on their trifix and their instincts. Like 6-1s and 6-8 stems, I do find have a bit more trust in themselves, in their own way of seeing the world. there can definitely be some stubborn 6-9 stems too, but 6-9 stems can also be like wibbly wobbly jelly people of uncertainty. Like, it's me, I'm the wibbly wobbly jelly person of uncertainty, who need a lot more like reassurance from others and need to run like a lot more things past other people. Doesn't mean they'll always follow it. Like, I can ask like tons of people for advice and then do the exact opposite that I wanted to do in the first place, which can be really frustrating for the people I care about. Social middle sixes I do find can be quite concerned with social, but ultimately I think they kind of want it to just be this like nice easy place that they can go to get their anxiety soothed and their dominant needs met, whereas like social dominant sixes can be really focused on the problems in the social realm and like trying to figure out how those problems can be fixed, because that's what sixes do, right? They see problems. And this is why like social sixes are the type that's most likely to be into like politics and social justice-y stuff, for example. Sixes in general though do have this really strong sense of like fairness and equality and justice, which can be in that social justice sense I just mentioned, can be in like a literal like law-abiding, rule-following kind of sense, but it can also be just in a six's internal sense that like everybody should be compromising to make things fair and equal and nice for everyone. This is attachment, but it's also superego. And while a six may not necessarily compromise or bend to the outside world due to this like sense, they are aware that they could, and they can feel like this guilt that maybe they should, or they can be really focused on why other people aren't bending or compromising or following the rules. Like ones and twos, sixes are superego types, which are also known as compliant types, although I think a lot of sixes are probably not going to like that descriptor. Being a superego or compliant type is absolutely not about being compliant to the demands or orders of other people. In fact, a lot of sixes are really like staunchly anti-authority and rebellious, but sixes are compliant to their own superego and their own morals. Basically, superego types need to feel like they and their actions are morally right and justified. This does lead to a lot of sixes who have issues with seeing themselves as like a bad person, and these very present feelings of guilt and shame can actually bolster a lot of sixes in their like mistyping as type 4s, because you know, when you're learning about the Enneagram, you hear that type 4's core issue is shame. Like, image type's core issue is shame, and you're so sort of plagued by these feelings of like shame and guilt that you think you must be an image type. But that's kind of like the opposite. That's kind of different to what image types are doing, who are like refining their image moment to moment to not have to deal with feelings of shame, whereas as a six you are all too conscious of it. But at the same time, you do get plenty of sixes who are very assured of their own moral goodness and superiority, and as with anything with type 6, you get plenty of sixes who vacillate between the two. Being a superego type means having a separated head center, and therefore having issues with the guidance function. As Enneagod puts it, superego types all have daddy issues. And this is why sixes are seeking an outside source that will act as like a dependable daddy figure to reliably guide them through a scary world. But you're constantly finding problems with it and rejecting it again, and then seeking it again or seeking another one in an endless cycle of feeling like, you know, a stranded, abandoned child in a supermarket who can't figure out their way around and is terrified that they're going to be lost forever. Being separated from the head center like this, I think, is most painful for sixes because they're also head types, so they can't help but try to use their separated center. For me, like my head center, when I go into it or when I try and make decisions based on like logic or understanding or thoughts when I'm in crisis, it does feel childlike. It feels unsteady and helpless, and like you're sort of flailing around, perpetually terrified and grasping for something, like anything to hold on to, just to try and make it feel safe again. Anyway, sixes have two modes to try and deal with this hell. They're either overdoing thinking like that, like paralyzed in inaction and paralyzed in the fear of being wrong because your head is just this mess of ungrounded thoughts. Or 6s are underdoing thinking by using the scramble of their heart and gut centers instead. I don't feel like super confident explaining the scramble, but basically 6s, when they're in this scramble mode, are using the values and emotions of their heart center to give that sort of superego moral justification and passion and push to that basically fuels their gut center actions and intuition. I feel like a really common example of this is how 6s can be really anxious and like procrastinate and dither about taking any action for themselves, but they get this instant surge of courage to like stride into battle fearlessly for a friend if that friend is like, you know, too nervous to tell the waiter that the order came out cold. I don't know why I'm giving food examples. Anyway, because basically when you do something like that, when you like do something for a friend that you would be nervous to do for yourself, that's not you having to make like a decision based on weighing up thoughts. That's you doing exactly what you feel is right based on like your gut instinct, your feelings, and the superego moral of loyalty to the people you care about. I think you also see 6s who have like very little like trust in their own intelligence, but can still argue for hours about a subject that they feel is morally right. And I think this is just that there's no need to consult your useless head if something is fueled by emotion or gut instinct instead. One of the more painful things for me when trying to accept my 6ness was this idea of being a head type, that I had all these like bad ideas that like head types were like robotic almost, that they were like analytical and stuck in their own heads. And I was like, you know, how can that be? I'm like really over-identified with my emotions. I always have been. But that's the thing. 6s are emotional. Like they're not cut off from the heart center. The heart center and feelings are experienced as a more trustworthy experience than thoughts. Like your emotions are experienced as kind of more concrete and real and stable, more stable than your thoughts, although the emotions themselves might not be that stable. I think this is especially so due to 6s also being reactive types, and this combination of superego and reactive, I think, is one of the reasons why 6s are generally such genuine, caring, loyal friends, because authenticity of the heart and emotions is really important to type 6s. So like types 4 and 8, 6s are reactive types, which are referred to as the assholes of the Enneagram. When a reactive type's needs are not met, they must draw attention to it and kind of indulge in the negativity of that experience. And this is where the 6 need to not only find flaws and holes, but to then call attention to it and yell about them comes from. And I think how you see a 6 doing this is going to differ depending on like their trifix. Like I do have double withdrawn fixes, and so I do like that withdrawnness is actually pretty easy to see in myself. It's one of the reasons I did originally type as a withdrawn type, and when I realised I wasn't a 4, I was really hoping I was a 9. Like it is pretty easy for me to just feel like, you know, what's the point, and just sort of like give up on trying to get my needs met and like go into myself, like go into my own head and try and deal with things internally. Whereas I think like a double assertive 683 would keep shouting about their needs not being met for a lot longer than I would. But in general, 6 crises are loud and annoying and quite demanding of the people like around the 6s, like their loved ones. 6s are not very good at keeping the reactivity and negativity to themselves, but they do still have that fear, of course, of judgment and losing support. So you sometimes see 6s bringing up problems in like a jokey way, or sometimes they will also give up on them the moment somebody else acknowledges the problem. Like 6s, I think especially 6-9s, can be really quick to like soothe someone and like be like, no, it's okay, if the other person apologizes for something the 6 has pointed out. The 6 really just needed to express it and get that reactivity sort of out there and acknowledged. So I recently heard a 6-wing 7 I know being referred to as having a finely honed bullshit detector. And I do think this applies just to sixes in general, because sixes spot holes in things so easily and they have that reactive need to call things out. They do tend to spot and call out bullshit just as like a matter of course. Negativity feels real and truthful to sixes in similar but like different ways to all reactive types. And this I think is part of the reason why authenticity is such a six buzzword. This can lead to some of the less pleasant aspects of type 6. Like type 6s are, because of this, very anti-narcissistic, while secretly often feeling quite superior themselves. And they can be really quick to tear down anybody who they think is presenting a false or overly polished image of themselves, or anybody who seems too happy. I think British, like modern British and Australian culture, are really reflective of these kind of six-ish qualities in a sense of what I've heard described as like tall poppy syndrome. Basically that somebody who stands out will be the first to be cut down, which I think is kind of a superego-y punishment for daring to put yourself above other people or think so highly of yourself, even though like lots of people who are the targets of this don't actually like think extra highly of themselves or anything. Sixes are just quite sensitive to the idea of other people seeing themselves as superior to the six, even though it's the six themselves who keeps themselves like ground down into the dirt. As well as this not very pleasant tendency to sabotage other people, six is also a really self-sabotaging type, and painfully they're often one of the most self-aware types. They kind of use that self-awareness as like a superego tool to keep themselves beaten down into submission. As a six, you are so aware of everything that could go wrong, and you are so aware of these ideas that like the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, or like the other shoe being about to drop, that it's honestly easier to just ruin everything for yourself. I sort of see it as being kind of like a Schrodinger's cat situation, but instead of the six, you know, waiting to see if the cat is alive or dead, the six would rather throw the box off a cliff and guarantee that they get the bad news, because the uncertainty of waiting for the bad news is like feels worse in the moment than you imagine the bad news itself would actually feel. Obviously, to be clear, that's a metaphor. Sixes are not putting cats in boxes and throwing them off cliffs. Like, it's a metaphor. But basically for a six, it feels like if I sabotage myself before I even have the chance to be happy, I don't have to live in fear of somebody or something coming along to ruin that happiness for me. Which ultimately this kind of just sums up what sixes are doing and why. That this idea that like almost like the world is out to get you, that it's scary and that you can't handle it, that it's going to catch you off your guard and really hurt you and like ruin your life basically. Sixes are so laser focused on exceptions and inconsistencies and on rules and how they're being broken, because that is where things can go wrong, and that is where you need to be preparing for the worst at all times. I feel like I have mostly talked about the negative parts of being a type 6, but then again, I am what I am, a double reactive, double negative asshole, but sixes in their like pendulum swing of variety can be like the absolute best and worst of people, even within a single individual six. Like sixes are funny, they're annoying, they're deeply caring, they're emotionally fragile. One day they can be the most loyal friend you could ever meet, and the next day they're an argumentative, over-emotional dickhead. But, you know, they're brilliant in any crisis that isn't about them, and absolutely fucking useless in any crisis that is. Six is a really varied type for better and worse. It actually took me about a year after discovering the Enneagram to realise and accept that I was a type 6, and that mistyping journey was really deeply painful in a lot of ways. Which is in no small thanks to like really shitty Enneagram descriptions that make 4 seem like the only interesting type and all attachment types out to be like mindless little like personality-free jellyfish. But I felt like if I accepted being a type 6, it was like having everything I liked about me, everything like artistic and poetic and beautiful ripped away from me, and just leaving behind this like boring sidekick character that all the descriptions made type 6 out to be. And accepting being a type 6 meant accepting like what felt like the worst parts of me, like the petty, the mean, the critical, the cowardly, the kind of pathetic parts of me. And after I finally got through my typing crisis and then had my typing call and everything, I honestly felt like I needed a shower for a few weeks afterwards, because it just felt like everybody around me could see these like ugly, glaring 6 traits just screaming out of me in every single thing that I said and did. What I also had to acknowledge was what I'd been getting out of typing as a 4. And yeah, it was partly like over glamorizing hexad types and like over glamorizing this idea of like not needing to look to the outside for anything. And it also felt like validation for the parts of me that I actually like and feel like are interesting. But I also came across the Enneagram at a time that I was really focused on like self-growth and self-development and healing, and the messages for how type 4 are meant to like overcome their type patterns actually fit really nicely into my type 6 patterns. It was said that, you know, type 4s were meant to learn to appreciate the moment and accept the mundane and not constantly be seeking their idealized image for how things should be. And I hated that advice, but it was really easy to absorb into my type 6 internal messages of like keeping myself small. And like I started to feel like maybe I should stop complaining, like maybe I should stop wanting anything for myself, maybe I should stop having goals. Like I ended up using my self-typing as a 4 to further my type 6 self-sabotage and self-minimizing and self-defeating. Like it was because even though that felt really painful, it felt easier than really facing up to the real problems that I have, that like the real source of my problems of constantly like talking myself out of things due to fear, or sabotaging myself when I didn't feel safe, or wallowing in self-hatred and self-victimizing, because it allows me to keep seeking guidance from the outside and keep myself small and safe and not draw too much attention to myself. And to be totally honest, I still haven't quite figured out how to not do that. 6s are fantastically self-aware and fantastically bad at doing anything with that self-awareness. It can be so easy as a 6 too to feel like the solution is just to swing in the opposite direction and do the opposite of what a 6 would do, but that is just 6ing in a different way, which I think is kind of the real horror of the Enneagram, that even when you think you're growing and healing and like overcoming your type patterns, you might actually just be doing them in a different way because they are so deeply ingrained. But I think the first real relief for me actually came when I finally accepted that I didn't have to try to not be a type 6, that actually that was impossible. I was always going to be one. And like, you know, accepting that I'm always going to be a petty, critical bitch, and I'm always going to be scared of things, and I'm always going to be a little bit of a downer and reactive and annoying and feel the need to get reassurance that my understanding of the world is okay. But it has meant that I can actually start working on the things that have really fucked my life up, and I get to start trying to step back and observe my type patterns in action and try to go on that line to 9 and be okay with not knowing. Like, to try to just trust in this universe of like endless possibility and unseen, unknowable futures, and like accept that you can never actually prepare for them, and actually just to trust in the potential for uncertainty to bring good instead of just bad.